Another edition of Beat the Closing Number presented by TheLines.com. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined by Brett Gibbons. You can follow him on X at Road to CFB. Follow me at Eli Hershkovich, talking about the Orange Bowl and the Cotton Bowl. Two great games, two great handicaps coming your way. Brett, how we doing? Ohio State still alive after that Michigan loss a month ago, I guess, at this point.
Boy, it really woke them up, didn't it? We'll get into it. I don't want to preview, jump ahead of ourselves here, but it's a good time to be a Buckeyes fan until it's not. We will see.
All right. And I know you got a bet for Ohio State, Texas.
Yes.
That line at Buckeyes -5.5 up to -6 was as high as -6.5 over the weekend. So we'll touch on that game second. But first up, the 7th seed in the college football playoff in the Orange Bowl, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Right now, as we record here the day before the game, Wednesday, January 8th, 1.5-point favorites against the Penn State Nittany Lions, the 6th seed in the CFP. Total between 44.5 and 45, pretty much consensus. The spread down from Notre Dame -2.5, though. So we have seen some money come in on Penn State over the last 24 hours or so. Couple injuries to note before I get to your handicap, Brett. Jeremiah Love only had 6 or so carries against Georgia in the quarterfinals. So his status and or just overall touch load definitely worth noting here before kickoff. And then the bigger name, the key to Penn State's elite defense, Abdul Carter, dealing with an injury that caused him to not practice much, seemingly, over the last couple of days. I don't think many reporters have had a chance to really literally see him in practice. So with those two injuries in mind, Carter being the much more impactful one, what's your overall handicap for this game?
Yeah, I think that line did move a touch in favor of Penn State because of Abdul Carter today. James Franklin did say that he expects him to play Wednesday, but it will be a game-time decision. He only played 19 snaps against Boise State, and Jeremiah Love re-injured an existing injury. He actually got hurt in both playoff games, so that's definitely something to watch. He's kind of the lifeblood of that Notre Dame run game. Look, there's two things that can be true, and I believe are true at the same time. Number one, Penn State had the easy route to get to the semifinals, but also they're a good team. I'm not sitting here saying that they're fraudulent or anything like that. They earned their spot there, but they, of course, were given pretty much the easiest route imaginable to the semifinals. Now, that said, so is Notre Dame, and I've seen them do it against much better competition. Defensively, they allowed 3 points apiece, if you're not including garbage time, to Indiana and Georgia. I mean, that's incredible. You're going into the playoff and holding teams to basically 3 points while the game is within reason. But do note that 17 of Notre Dame's 23 points came via special teams against Georgia last game. Their only offensive touchdown came on a short field that, of course, was created by the defense. I think these two teams are very similar in style, if not necessarily same in approach. So I'm going to look at it. Who do I trust more, Drew Aller or Riley Leonard? I think I lean Riley Leonard just because of what I've seen him do and what the coaching staff trusts him to do. Do I trust the Notre Dame offensive line or the Penn State offensive line? Saw a great tweet out there. Sorry, forget who it was by, but Mitchell Schwartz had kind of quoted it and shared it, going over how good the Notre Dame offensive line is, even with their absences. So I think I go Notre Dame offensive line there as well. And then probably the easiest choice, in my opinion, here is, do you trust Marcus Freeman or James Franklin more in a big game? That's Marcus Freeman all day for me. So until Franklin proves me wrong in a big game, I'm going to bet against him. Does SMU count as a big game? Does Boise State count as a big game? I don't think
counts
so.
As a couple playoff wins.
Yeah, but I don't think it counts as a big game to them. They expected to win, double-digit favorites in both of those. So this honestly is a pretty simple handicap. I like what Notre Dame does, about 20% more in just about every facet, including coaching. Notre Dame's been a reliable bet all year long. I don't think that that's any different today. I'm going Notre Dame with the points.
So one thing worth noting here, Penn State digging into this one a little bit closer, especially with Penn State's defense, which, as you noted, seemingly should, air quotes, should have Abdul Carter on the field, haven't really faced a quarterback like Riley Leonard. They've played some dual-threat quarterbacks, including Ohio State's Will Howard, who we'll get to when we handicap Ohio State and Texas. But Leonard is a true dual-threat quarterback. Yeah. So how do you think that matchup goes, and especially as it relates to maybe Notre Dame's team total or just the full game total?
In terms, I don't like betting these totals. I'm not a good totals better in college football, just up front. You're not going to hear me give out many totals because I just don't have a very good grasp on that. So in terms of that, not entirely sure. But Riley Leonard, I hate to use this coaching term, but he's the guy that keeps you honest, right? You can't just load the box and go after if Jeremiah Love is in the game or if any of the other backs are in the game. You can't just go after them blindly because, Riley Leonard will make you play on any given play. And I think that's why you see his sack totals are so low too, because he can get out of that. And that's the one thing that, Penn State really, really likes to hang their hat on as a pass rush, especially with a top, future top 10, maybe top 5 overall pick in Abdul Carter. But when you have a quarterback that's so mobile to be able to neutralize that kind of pass rush, that opens up the game, that makes the defense sit on their heels a little bit more. And it's really going to make that Penn State secondary work hard at their craft. And they're a pretty decent secondary, but I do think they have some flaws this year. Notre Dame's not exactly trotting out the Ohio State receiving core, but they're good enough. And so I think, Riley Leonard is going to be able to create things out of nothing. And he's done it against defenses that I think are a lot more dangerous and a lot more stout than Penn State. That's not to say that Penn State has a bad defense. All 4 of these teams left have championship caliber defenses. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But I do think that Riley Leonard can counter what they do pretty well.
My look at the total here, and definitely good takes there. Last week, we saw this total at the same number pretty much with Georgia and Notre Dame. Now, that doesn't mean it won't go under again. I had the under in that matchup in the Sugar Bowl. Same number, arguably a more explosive offense, more trustworthy quarterback. I think you would say between what Georgia had on the field last week and Drew Aller, even though you could definitely... Just a touch. But with Aller in mind, so probably not a play on the total for me, just with no adjustment really in the number and a seemingly more explosive offense that Penn State is bringing to the field. As you mentioned, Georgia really struggled. 2 offenses that couldn't move the ball against Notre Dame's defense. You would think Penn State can do something. But can Drew Aller handle these Notre Dame blitz packages? Notre Dame blitzing at around a 35% clip, and their success rate in terms of creating pressure on blitzes at 61%, which is borderline elite, if not purely elite. So how do you gauge Notre Dame's defense, conversely, against Drew Aller here?
Yeah, Georgia's offensive line, to go back a game, they actually really did a good job adjusting. But those first couple of drives, Notre Dame's defense just had them in an absolute blender. And you don't see Kirby Smart coach teams in a blender very often. And Marcus Freeman did it to him a couple of times, including that genius late switcheroo that he had on the 4th down to basically ice the game. But I think I'm going to have a better answer to that in the first couple of drives. You see, the first couple of drives, I should say after the first drive or so, because I want to see how Penn State's offensive line is able to do that. I don't think we've seen all the blitz packages from Notre Dame because they really haven't needed to use it. Going up against Gunnar Stockton last game, who just has no sense of a pass rush whatsoever. Guy was just, he never felt anybody coming. I don't know if that's because he's played behind a very good Georgia offensive line in his career or what, but I think Aller has a little bit more sense of the pass rush. But we saw Ohio State get home on him multiple times. Every time that they played him, they managed to get home. So good defensive lines that do have aggressive pass rushers, good schemes are able to get home on Penn State. But they do have a good offensive line. So we'll see how that goes. I like to see how they adjust. If they can't adjust by drive 3, it's going to be a long day and potential blowout territory in that, for just isolating that kind of matchup.
So would you maybe, and I know you said you don't like to touch totals pregame, but with that in mind, would you maybe look toward a live under if Notre Dame gets the lead, maybe into the second half, a second half under?
Well, if you're forcing me to make a play on the total at all, I could see a case for a pregame under. I think there's a stray 45.5 out there, but if you want to take under 44.5, that's probably fine because I don't think either of these teams is going to be hanging 40 themselves. We just haven't seen either one do it against quality defenses, and you're talking about a Notre Dame defense that may be able to neutralize Penn State fully. If you're asking me to pick a side on the total, that I would probably play under. I'm not necessarily sure if I need to see it live or not. I could pretty confidently say that I wouldn't be betting the over in this, that's for sure.
Right. I'll probably stay away just from the notion that no adjustment, better offense. Penn State could convert in the red zone. Notre Dame's defense has proved me wrong, especially going back to the first round matchup against Indiana. I saw some YouTube commenter said, don't want to watch these videos if a guy's talking about college football playoff bets, and he said he took Indiana. I have no problem talking about my losses. So I had Indiana in the first round. I took the under. in regards to Notre Dame's second round matchup against Georgia. Hit on that. Probably no live bet for me. Maybe a look at Penn State if they get down by a possession or so. Just because if you go back to the look-ahead line, not that the second game we're going to talk about, there's a major adjustment from the look-ahead line to the pregame number, and even going back to the weekend when this number opened up or reopened. But Notre Dame was a 1.5-point favorite against Penn State on the look-ahead. It's still at that price, even though they reopened around 2.5. So I don't really see a reason to bet this one pregame. I don't see any value per se, but I get your Notre Dame handicap.
Yeah, it's and again, when we're at this point in the season, I'm pretty confident in saying I will continue betting a certain way until I'm proven wrong.
Yeah. I mean, until the market or until James Franklin proves you wrong, then I guess you have
I've been waiting a while on that one, Eli.
Absolutely. So if you're looking to make some picks for Notre Dame and Penn State, and you're not looking to bet any money at the best sports books out there, when we highly recommend you checking out the best online sportsbook promos at thelines.com. But we do have a free contest at play.thelines.com where you could win $100 in our college football playoff staking game for the semifinal round, including picks for Notre Dame and Penn State. So be sure to check that out over at play.thelines.com. On to Friday's matchup, Brett, for the Cotton Bowl. The 8-seed Ohio State Buckeyes, 5.5-point favorites at Caesars Sportsbook as we record this. -105 is the VIG on that point spread, but pretty much sixes everywhere else across the board. So a little bit of a discount if you're looking to take Ohio State at Caesars if that line is still up. Taking on the number 5 seed in the CFP, the Texas Longhorns, total of 53.5, depending on the shop. I mentioned the adjustment, so I'll touch on that first. The look-ahead line for this game was Ohio State -1.5, -2, maybe 2.5. But as of early last week, I saw some Buckeyes -1.5 out there on the look-ahead spread. Not that you can get a lot down on that number, but it's still worth noting in terms of the market adjustment. So before we get into the handicap, if we go back to 2019 LSU, because I think it's comparable in that sense, when Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers made that run, not only in the college football playoff, but in the latter course of the season, there was a pretty major adjustment on their power rating as it related to the betting market. Is this warranted, the similar adjustment on Will Howard and the Buckeyes?
It has been made. We saw this.
Should it have been made?
Should it have been? Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's difficult because this is the first year of the college football playoff in terms of having 4 separate rounds. It is different, and it is worth adjusting your teams in terms of recent form rather than taking these season-long numbers. And I do have an adjustment that I'll talk about in this handicap, but I do think you have to look at what Ohio State's been doing in the past couple of rounds. And if you want to factor the Michigan total outcome into this, sure. I don't believe that this is the same game being played that was played in rivalry week. So yeah, I absolutely think it was warranted. The books made an educated move. We saw Circa, one of the sharpest books out there, make a bigger move than this because some opened at 4. Some of the rec books opened at 4.5. They opened up at 6. It's like, I'm following that. They know what they're doing. They're confident enough to hang a 6 out there. And because point is, if you lay an Ohio State -1.5, you're going to have a major, major liability on the Buckeyes that are playing, I'm not afraid to say, the best football in the country right now.
Right. And you look at this offense that the Buckeyes have displayed over the last couple of weeks, especially against Oregon, just an onslaught in the first half. Will Howard hasn't recorded a turnover-worthy play in the first 2 playoff games, but Jeremiah Smith against one of the best cornerbacks in college football in Barron for Texas, an All-American quarterback. Smith had his way with that Ducks defense and had his way with Tennessee's defense for that matter. Same result, similar result here. I know you mentioned staying away from Smith's props in the first round. We didn't do a podcast together last week. How would you approach maybe not Smith in particular, unless you want to take a look at his receiving yards props, but just Ohio State's offense, team total wise, full game total wise. How do you look at Ohio State's offense against Texas's defense?
Well, while I talk about Jahdae Barron versus Jeremiah Smith, can you actually please pull up the props on that? In Ohio, I no longer have access to those props. I am curious what it's at. But the one thing I do want to bring up with Barron, he's 5'11". Jeremiah Smith is 6'4" with the receiving range of a 2-car garage. Jahdae Barron, he's arguably the best pure DB in college football right now, but there's only so much you can do when you're faced with somebody that's that size, and I think that's why these teams have had such issues guarding Jeremiah Smith, even outside of his skill set, is he's just bigger than every corner in college. There's no corners right now that have the length that, you're not seeing a Sauce Gardner prototype corner in college football right now, certainly not left in the college football playoff, among the college football playoff teams, and that's just, if you don't have the size and the length to guard him, you're just not going to do anything about it. And you can go ahead and double team him. You can have a safety bracket him. That's fine. But then you're leaving fewer resources to Emeka Egbuka, who's an All-American type player. Even G. Scott. I mean, the Buckeyes just go so deep. Brandon Inniss, you're talking about a receiving core that just doesn't end. The well doesn't dry up of 5-star talent. So sure, you can try. We see that it's becoming viral screenshot or photograph of Jeremiah Smith. It's a little angled, so it's a little misleading, against 3 Oregon defenders just going over top of him and catching the ball. And it's kind of a point where it's like, you know what? He's going to get what he's going to get. You got to mitigate the other facets of the game. Did you get a chance to pull up the yardage?
Yeah, it's at 85.5.
Oh, that's it?
Significant vig both ways, but...
Yeah, well, understandably so. I'd take over 85.5. I mean, we've seen the winning game plan for Ohio State, and there's no reason they're going to change it this round. It's throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith as many times as you can, and it seems to be working for them.
I want to go back to the quarterfinals with Texas and Arizona State, just because Arizona State backdoor covering in the fourth quarter into overtime. Right. Epic game. Texas winning in double overtime, interception ending that one. What did you make of the result, whether it was Texas and their inability to close out a lower tier opponent, or maybe Arizona State playing a more efficient game than what their power rating said, and therefore they were underrated entering the game? Or is that just a byproduct of Texas's full body of work? What did you come away with immediately after the game, and then as you've maybe thought about it heading into this one, especially considering the market adjustment from the look-ahead line?
Yeah, it could have been my error watching the game. I kind of came away with it like, wow, Arizona State. I did say, hey, I didn't get to say it on here, but I do think Arizona State was going to play a closer game than many believe. And it was just kind of pure will from the Sun Devils. That was an incredible effort on their part. But after sitting on it and going back over it and writing up a lengthy preview on this game over at the lines and doing my homework for this, Texas scored 14 points in 3 snaps with possession of the football, and that includes the punt return touchdown by Silas Bolden. They didn't score a touchdown again until the fourth quarter, and that's something Texas has done multiple times this year. And the takeaway for me is, what happens when opposing teams don't get the offense going early and score early against the Buckeyes? We saw it happen in the first 2 rounds of this playoff. You get flash fried. The game's over by halftime. So, you do have to note that Texas's defense is going to put up a lot more of a resistance against Ohio State's offense than either Tennessee, who I think their defense is a bit overrated, and Oregon, whose defense was just kind of meh. But those long stretches of quarters without touchdowns can't happen. And Arizona State's defense is really good. It's a greater sum than a lot of its parts will tell. And they got, they obviously got a very important player back mid-game. But if you're Texas, you just can't afford to go 2 quarters without scoring a touchdown, because Ohio State's not going to do that. I don't care what defense you are. We've seen a disregard for the level of competition they've been playing. There's not a college defense in the nation that's going to slow down that defense to the point of, or offense, that you're not going to score for that long of a time. So Texas has to be able to score. And if Ewers is playing the way that he was against Arizona State, which we talked about not being able to trust him all year, and we talked about him not being very good. He underthrows deep balls, but I think it was exemplified against Arizona State because his receivers were so wide open and he wasn't able to get it done. They're not going to be that wide open against Ohio State. Let's be clear about that. that's not going to be an opportunity that he's going to be able to waste. He's going to have to make NFL throws against these guys, and who knows, maybe he will. Maybe there's a little bit of added oomph there because he was a Buckeye for a year and played very sparingly. But if you're going to have that kind of dry spell from your offense, it's game over. That's his, we're going to see another flash fry from Ohio State if that's the case. And that's my biggest takeaway from the Arizona State game is now it was self-inflicted. It wasn't even Arizona State's defense was playing pretty well, but it was majorly self-inflicted. There were opportunities for Ewers and Texas to fully put that game away by halftime. They didn't do it.
And on the flip side, there were opportunities for Arizona State to win that game in regulation,
yes.
not just on the penalty that wasn't called. I don't know how that wasn't called.
I don't know. Don't ask me. I have no idea.
But also failing to score. Granted, they got the safety on the subsequent play, but failing to score a touchdown, 4 tries from the 2-yard line or at the very least in goal-to-go situations. So I made the case that maybe Texas playing with their food a bit in the fourth quarter, but you could also say that there was a lot of meat left on the bone for that Arizona State offense. Now, you mentioned Quinn Ewers against the Buckeyes defense. He has had a lot of success this season historically against cover one defenses. I've been the first person on this podcast to criticize, or maybe the second, depending on who spoke first, to criticize Quinn Ewers, but schematically it is a pretty good matchup for him on paper, personnel aside, no?
Sure. But I'm not setting personnel aside. I can't in good faith do that. I do want to talk about, though, in the specific passing game, the different facet of it. A lot of people are talking about Texas' defensive line against Ohio State's offensive line, especially with the reshuffling and the injuries. I really think the biggest impact in this game is the Ohio State defensive line against the Texas offensive line. The Buckeyes in 2 college football playoff games, 32 pressures and 12 sacks, including 8 on Dylan Gabriel, quarterback that doesn't get sacked because of scheme and how good his offensive line in front of him is. Quinn Ewers was only pressured 14 times, which is something to be said for a very good offensive line. But in those 14 pressures, he was sacked 5 times. That's a very high pressure to sack ratio, and that's concerning because that's Ewers taking sacks. And there was a couple of times where defenders were running free and being able to get to him against Arizona State, but it's just a matter of you got to see that protection and slide the protection up front. You're able to fool him, apparently. And then, in the SEC championship game, he took 6 sacks on 17 pressures. I think Ohio State's going to be able to get home, and I think that's where the game's going to be pivoted, is their ability to rush the passer. I mean, Jack Sawyer was the ridicule for 2 full weeks on social media about his reaction to Michigan playing in the flag, and now he's taking that anger and putting it on the field, and that's a very scary prospect for somebody that's a potentially a higher NFL prospect. And then you have JT Tuimoloau on the other side, and Tyreek Williams even up the middle is extremely disruptive. So I really think that's going to be the issue for Texas's offense. It's not going to be, can the receivers get open? Can Ewers play well against cover one? Can they run the ball, which I can talk about too. There might be issues there. I really think that Texas is going to have some sporadic issues keeping Ewers protected, and against the way that Ohio State's defense has been playing, that's going to be a major issue because they've been flash frying these teams without turnovers. They're not forcing turnovers in these playoff games. It's 3 and out. It's a sack on 3rd and long, and you're done. And you're punting the ball back to them, and they're scoring in 3 plays.
Right. I mean, you go back to me, just someone who handicaps college basketball a lot, and UConn's dominant run over the last 2 tournaments, but specifically the one from a couple years ago where they got hot down the stretch and they dominated every single team they played in March. The case was, okay, the projection over the course of a full season was X for this game, but the market adjusted. Same deal with Ohio State. And like I said, more comparable from a college football level of things when you take a look back in 2019 with Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers. Before we get out of here, Brett, I wanted to touch on national championship odds and hypothetical lines for the championship game. First, with that, an article I have up over at thelines.com cites all of those point spreads. Ohio State, a touchdown favorite, give or take, against both Notre Dame and Penn State. And Texas would be favored by around a field goal, probably below the 3-point key number against Notre Dame, but around a field goal against Penn State. Would you take a look at any of those numbers and or national championship odds with the Buckeyes near odds-on favorites to win it all at this point, right around minus 130?
Probably not, just because it's the worst of the number. You're better off doing the rolling money line parlay if you want to do that, because if Notre Dame is there, I don't think that the look ahead line is going to change all that much. If both favorites win, I don't think there's going to be a huge adjustment in their power rating unless Ohio State beats Texas by like 50 or vice versa.
Ohio State wins. Could you see this scenario where Ohio State plays below expectation, wins by a field goal, and Notre Dame seemingly won in the blowout?
Sure. That'd be a slippery slope, I think, for the odds makers if they're all of a sudden going to favor Notre Dame there. I think that would be a line that would not last very long.
Right, not favor, but
on how. Where
we could see Ohio State -5.5, -6.
Oh, I'm sorry. That far ahead. Boy. That's a lot of points. I don't think we'll make it to that point. I think that would be kind of foolish as well on the odds makers point. Again, unless Notre Dame fully implodes. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the hypothetical ones. I know that your bets can be voided and handed back to you if that matchup doesn't happen. And you're probably getting the best of the number if you do go ahead and lay the 1.5 with Ohio State on that. But I'm just taking rolling money line parlay rather than betting those hypotheticals. By the way, I did want to run back really quick. Ohio State -5.5. If that wasn't clear, by the way, I was talking about that game. I am taking the side with the Buckeyes there. But yeah, on the national championship futures, I think you're just better off betting it game to game. That's just the way that I bet. I'm a little bit more conservative maybe in that point. I'm willing to take the risk that it opens up Ohio State -2.5 or an extreme -5.5, then I just don't have to bet it at all. But I think either of the teams that they're going to play there aren't going to see their power rating change all that much. And you're probably going to be dealing with numbers that are at least similar, at least comparable to what those hypotheticals are right now.
I want to do some quick math here on the show. We'll see how quickly I could do this. But if we were to do some semblance of a money line rollover here on Ohio State, so we take the money line odds from, again, going to talk this out as I calculate here. Let's use Caesars Sportsbook. So Ohio State -220 on the money line. Let's say you bet a standard 220 on that. So you roll over, it's probably going to be a little steeper on a championship price, maybe around 250, 260, 270. Okay. Right. You might be getting a better number on the odds board right now.
Yeah, that's pretty rare. That's a rare instance. Then yeah, you know what? I changed my answer then. Yes. Yeah, take Ohio State -130 to win it all in that case. That's a pretty rare instance in which we actually have the future be better than taking the rolling money line parlay. I mean, you could also look at the exacts if you want to. I'm pretty confident in Notre Dame winning this game. And so if you want to back Ohio State, you could take Ohio State over Notre Dame +220 at FanDuel. That's an option as well.
All right. So just to recap our bets, I have no pregame bets on either game. I'll probably be looking to take Penn State if they get down by a possession or so against Notre Dame. I think that one's going to be fairly close. And then you like Notre Dame to win the game.
Yeah.
And are you taking, just to recap, money line or on the 1.5 point spread?
I'll take the 1.5. I'll take the 1.5 on Notre Dame.
Okay, and then Ohio State -5.5. There are 6s available. You like it up to 6?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take it on 6. The difference between 5.5 and 6 is not negligible, but it's small percentage points. I do want to leave the people with one more stat. It's Ohio State's defense against the run, because this was incredible. Against Oregon, 14 of 20 rush attempts for Oregon went for 2 yards or less. That's it.
The one caveat I will say to that, and I think anybody watching or listening to any podcast will be looking, unless you just want to lay the chalk, which is totally fine, but there has to be some pushback. And there has been pushback in the market, to be fair. Ohio State had a positive game script throughout the first 2 rounds. So
yes,
you would expect a rushing attack to struggle in that sense, right?
It was struggling from the start, though, on both games. Tennessee, Samson couldn't get anything going. Jordan James couldn't get anything going before he exited. I mean, he was out of the gate. And I know that this Ohio State scoring was also out of the gate, But that's part of it. If Ohio State can get out of the gate again, and Texas has that long, dry spell on offense, the run game's not going to work. But that is a good point, at least worth bringing up.
Right. And the one last thing I want to bring up, you brought it up with Ohio State playing with an edge, at least going back to the first-round game against Tennessee after losing to Michigan. And intuitively, I know you could say hindsight is 2020, but playing with their head on fire certainly doesn't hurt at this point. And sometimes teams need a push like that.
Yeah. I mean, Day coaches his best football with his back against the wall. I brought it up about the 2022 game against Georgia versus how they played against Michigan the week before. He just, when his job's on the line, all of a sudden he comes alive and unlocks the full potential of Ohio State. I also did see, I don't necessarily know how much I buy into it fully, but that Ohio State was simply playing vanilla all year long and run. We're going to push guys around. Then all of a sudden, hey, it's playoff time. I don't know if that's necessarily true just in the case of like, yes, they did play that against Michigan, but I think that was really just like a full coaching meltdown. But yeah, I mean, you see what happens when Chip Kelly opens up the full playbook. It's kind of game over for people are going to be commenting here, Ohio State homer. But you know what? We'll talk on Monday and see how that goes.
Pete Kwiatkowski certainly has his hands full. Hopefully you have your hands full with a bunch of information and process in general from Brett, especially when it comes to handicapping these two games. The Orange Bowl kicking off Thursday night between Notre Dame and Penn State, and the Cotton Bowl on Friday with Ohio State and Texas. We'll also have NFL playoff previews up on the Lines YouTube channel and Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your favorite podcast. A loaded weekend of sports betting, college basketball too. I wanted to throw one last thing in there for you, Brett. How much does it hurt that Michigan, even though their football team struggled this year, right now is borderline top 10 on a couple different analytics sites in basketball? Even when the Wolverines are down, they're not completely down.
Good for them.
Fair enough. So he is Brett Gibbons at Road to CFB. I'm Eli Hershkovich. Thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Beat the Closing Number presented by TheLines.com. So long, everybody, and good luck with your college football playoff semifinal bets.